Okay.
So we're finally here, the very first podcast from the lab. Courtney, thank you for joining me.
Of
How are
course,
you doing,
Chris.
man?
I'm doing well, man. I'm very happy to be here and to talk about music, honestly, and the creation of.
Oh, man. Well, that's what it's all about here at the lab. But one of the cool things that's been really inspiring me, especially in the last 24 hours, is we just watched the movie about the Wrecking Crew, the documentary that just came out. And just nonstop inspirational footage and music and people and all kinds of things. What'd you think?
It was a fantastic film. For those of you that don't know, The Wrecking Crew was a set of about 20 LA musicians that were the studio musicians of their time. I mean, they played on everything from the Mission Impossible theme to Sonny and Cher records. I mean, anything that came out of LA, they probably had a hand in it.
Especially during late 50s all the way through early to mid 70s. They were on so many records that it made record labels uncomfortable with putting their names on that many albums because the public wouldn't believe.
This actually blew my mind. I didn't know this, but they would actually they had songwriters come up with songs. The Wrecking Crew would record them and then slap another band's name on it and teach these kids how to play music, and then off they were. Now they were the Monkees or any other number of one-hit wonders, but it was the same musicians cutting the tracks.
Yeah, a lot of times at one point in the movie, it even showed how the band was in one studio, and then across the other side of town, the Wrecking Crew was in a studio recording the song while the band was across town filming the music video, which involved them playing the instruments. And just the charade was...
Oh yeah,
it's unbelievable.
Well, the one where they talk about the Monkees in particular, how I think they were even at the recording session, but at the session they were just filming like you were mentioning, they were just filming them playing their instruments, but the crew was actually doing the damage. And I have to say, they say that they played on everything in that era, and they're not kidding.
It's either way, it's remarkable, and the reason it's so inspiring is simply because, well, in a way, that's what we're trying to do these days. Not to recreate it. They've already made their music. It's about taking those ideals or what made them the Wrecking Crew of their time and figuring out what can we do to fit in our time and still going after being this really tight rhythm section. And it's about being this team of music makers that through the repetition of making music day in and day out, become the masters of it and become this irreplaceable sound and vibe and taking that and collaborating with as many artists as possible.
Well, and one thing I think that we kind of saw a little bit about in the movie, but that I wasn't very familiar with before I started working with you guys, is not only the equipment, but just the setup of the space and how that affects the music making. Because oftentimes musicians focus on the music, obviously, and the style and how those pieces fit together. But we don't always think about everything else that's not the music, but still directly affects the music. The way the room is organized, how much space there is, knowing that everything you need is within arm's distance or within your reach.
Yeah, it's a really delicate balance between being close together so that we can vibe off each other and so that there's no delay in our conversation. Balancing that against wanting to have our instruments isolated, for the purposes of recording. In the movie, you see them using a lot of, a large room with most of the musicians sitting in the one room and using a lot of baffles. These days, using, I guess we like to use direct inputs while having microphones up on the drum kit most likely, or one thing or another. And it is really interesting to see how, I guess one of the things that made them such an impactful group was because they had, their workflow was so tight between essentially musicians would show up at the session, charts are ready, engineers have signals hot, a couple takes, couple hours go by, and there's a brand new hit. And
not only one brand new hit, right? They would say 3 hours, 4 songs. The level of musicianship and experience you need for that is is a bit ridiculous when you
Yeah,
think about how long it can take to record a song.
In fact, the most extreme example I remember is they recall doing an album a day for, like weeks on end. It would be 6 songs in the morning,
Right.
6 songs in the evening, and the next day do it all over again on a completely different album for a different artist. And yeah, that's it takes a level of, not just musicianship, but teamwork on, the engineering and the producing and the musician, everything, in order to be able to just crank them out like that. It's very, very impressive. So after seeing that movie and, basically doing what we do, which is, we try and show up, responding to ads, looking for specific kinds of music, but also creating our own, what do you take away that you're really thinking about the next time, we come into a session to play?
The biggest takeaway I had is being absolutely prepared to be on tape, or in this case on file, but being ready to nail it in one take. So you have a singer coming in, they have charts, they have an idea for a sound. Maybe in our case it's a little less formal, I think, in some ways, but to be able to interpret what that singer wants, because most people don't know musician language outside of musicians.
Yeah.
So you'll have a lot of producers that say descriptive things that are somewhat helpful. I have a friend that writes tracks for licensing films, and he says that sometimes people will come back to him and say, "This is great. Can you add a little more purple to it?" and of course you can interpret that in several ways, but for a musician, it's not as helpful as being able to say less, or on the beat or off the beat or something like that. So
yeah, I guess that's one of the things that I think is really cool about our team and our specific setup. And the biggest difference, between us and the Wrecking Crew, not that, we are crazy similar to them, it's the biggest difference is being, scale. And, they're using what we're the A studios of the day, and it's a huge network. And most of what we do is a very small team of 4 or 5 people trying to come into the room. And there's, there are about 4 or 5 people on top of that initial group that come in less frequently to add and to fill out. But it is really interesting, trying to make the most of a smaller team. And, we have lots of advantages in terms of where the Wrecking Crew, is interpreting for, all different kinds of artists all throughout the day in a more formal setting, because it's a professional studio, and time is money, and these are the A studios. It's expensive. For us, it can be less formal because of our small scale, and it allows us to maintain a really personable environment, which helps the translation of what the artist wants to what the musicians are able to deliver that much easier when we can bring in an artist, a singer, like your girlfriend Zelda the other day.
That's right.
And it was so nice just to have a relaxed environment, and when they're relaxed, you can much more easily read, what the singer, might want out of the session. And when they're relaxed, it's much easier also for them to give you what you're asking for. And so when the vibe feels cool and the musicians are happy, and the communication between, every aspect between the musicians and the artists, and when everyone wants different things and is finding ways to communicate them, once a language is developed, it's amazing how fast things can move, even at our small scale.
Ideas and music, both. And also, by less formal, one thing I was thinking as you were talking about this, we've done everything so far. We don't have a team of songwriters. We don't have a team of engineers or producers. We are everything in this project thus far. I mean, we are the engineers, producers, songwriters, musicians.
Arrangers.
Yes.
And yeah, it's exciting and it's a headache at times.
Yes, definitely. Sometimes you want to show up and just be the musician. Where's my chart? Let me just see what I need to play and do it. But I think it's a good experience, and it gives you a little bit more empathy for what everyone else does.
Completely. And one of the things that I always try and keep in mind as, we come in and, I find myself wearing, 5 or 6 hats that day, is that every time you wear that hat, or doing that job, say it's cleaning something up that might be, typically an intern's work and
Sure.
in a real studio, or you're doing something that's more tedious or isn't what your A game is, which could be playing or just songwriting or just mixing. Whenever you're doing something that isn't those, it's really good to, try and understand, as much as you can about that other job, so that someday, hopefully when someone else is doing it for you, not only do you understand their position, but because you understand more about that job, the communication between you can become infinitely better because you understand what kind of problems they're having to solve, and having done them yourself, a lot of times you can just empathize a little bit easier.
Absolutely. I've learned a lot about that ever since joining you guys, because I came in as mostly just a player. I've played with many different bands, or I've even had people hire me for recording before as well. And I think that's actually what you guys did first, is I was paid for my first session here, but ever since I've been learning the ropes, so to speak. There's a lot to learn. The rabbit hole goes deep on music.
Indeed it does. And I guess to bring it back around to the Wrecking Crew, and it's so inspiring to see what they did in their time. Again, this 60s and 70s, and towards the end of the movie, they also talk about how all of a sudden, mid 70s, bands started playing their own music, and their whole world changed because just a new wave, and that's how the whole music industry works. And so watching that and having our space and situation, developing our own skills, it's really important. Man, I just to keep in mind that wearing all these different hats and learning so much, that's what is so different and so important about today. The difference between their time and ours is, I guess back then, just the way that technology was, it forced people to be more specialists in their thing.
Sure.
And today, because kind of everybody can get started on everything, you get to a point, like us, where we're trying to push ahead, and everybody has to wear, so many hats and be so versatile.
Well, there was a time where this would have been unimaginable, unless you were fairly rich, I think, to have your own recording studio. I mean, the 60s, you had to have a record label. You had to have a place to go to record these things. Now I know there are a lot of stories of smaller operations. Someone would set up in their church or something like that because they had a few mics. But to be able to do it on this level, I think it's pretty special. I mean, we live in a great time for recording and getting your voice out there.
Indeed. Man, and I couldn't think of a better place to end. This has been the very first podcast from the lab. As you can tell, we have a lot going on in terms of our own studio. We're trying so much music that we're trying to make, and people we're trying to work with, and hopefully some of those people will make their way onto this podcast. We'd love to talk to them. Courtney and I play in a band called Boulevard Jam Society, and that band also does a lot of work here at the lab, recording songs for other artists and friends, and responding to ads, just looking for specific songs for all kinds of purposes. And so from making the music to writing to producing to recording to getting geeky and talking about it, we're here to have fun because we love it through and through.
Absolutely. I'm excited to see what we come up with in this podcast too. I mean, this is just scratching the surface. We could have done a whole hour on this movie, I think.
Yeah, but wow, I think that's a great place to put it. Thanks a whole lot, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Thank you.